I was halfway to the airport when it hit me like a brick to the chest. I had left my late husband's will on the kitchen counter. That single sheet of paper held everything. The house, the savings, the vineyard in Napa, the retirement accounts, all carefully divided the way he wanted before he passed. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I pulled off to the side of the road. The airport could wait. That one was too important. I turned the car around and drove back home in silence, my heart pounding faster with every passing mile. I parked a little way down the street, not even pulling into the driveway. Something in my chest told me to be quiet, to be careful. I walked up to the house, turned the key slowly in the lock, and opened the door without a sound. That's when I heard it. Whispers, voices coming from the kitchen, low and urgent. I froze at the doorway, pressing myself against the wall, straining to hear. It was my son's voice first, Michael. My only child. The boy I had carried in my arms, the one I had trusted above anyone. His voice was sharp, cold, and it sent shivers down my spine. "If we play this right," he said, "Mom won't see it coming. Once she's gone, everything will be in our name." Then his wife, Jessica, spoke, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "She's too old to fight back, Michael. She trusts you. By the time she realizes what happened, we'll already have it signed and filed. That vineyard will be ours." My breath caught in my throat. My son, my flesh and blood, plotting to ruin me, to take everything his father and I built with our bare hands. I felt my knees go weak, but I stayed still. My phone was in my pocket. With trembling hands, I pulled it out, pressed record, and held it close. They didn't know I was standing there, recording. Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Let me know where you are watching from. You don't know, you might be lucky to get a shout out on our next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you like stories like this. Now, let me take you back to how it all began. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 65 years old and I live in California. Life hasn't been easy, but I've always believed in kindness, in working hard, in treating people right even when they don't always treat you the same. My late husband, Daniel, used to tell me, "Maggie, the world can be cruel, but you don't have to be." And I carried those words with me my whole life. Daniel and I built a life from nothing. We were high school sweethearts, married young, and worked our fingers to the bone. He was the kind of man who woke up before sunrise, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to build something lasting for us, for our family, for Michael. When we were in our 40s, we bought a little piece of land up in Napa Valley. At first, people laughed at us. "You two know nothing about wine," they said. And maybe they were right. But Daniel had a dream. He learned, he studied, he failed, and then he tried again. Slowly, that little vineyard grew into something people actually wanted. We weren't rich, not in the flashy way some folks are, but we were comfortable. More importantly, we were proud. Michael grew up surrounded by it all. The vines, the late nights, the smell of grapes on our clothes. We gave him everything we never had. Private schools, college tuition, his first car. I thought he appreciated it. I thought he loved us for it. But sometimes you can give a child the world, and they'll still want to take it from your hands. When Daniel passed, my heart broke into pieces. We have been married 42 years. Do you know what it's like to wake up in the morning and reach for someone who isn't there anymore? To cook for two and eat alone? To hear a laugh in your dreams, and then wake up to silence? That was my life. Michael was there at first. He helped with the funeral, stayed by my side for a while, told me he would always look after me. But soon enough, I noticed the shift. His visits grew shorter, his calls less frequent. And when Jessica entered the picture, things changed even more. Jessica, I never trusted that woman. From the moment I met her, she had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She married my son fast, too fast. And before I knew it, she was talking about investments, about modernizing the vineyard, about selling assets that Daniel and I had sworn we'd keep for the family. I tried to ignore it. For the sake of peace, I stayed quiet. But silence has a price. That morning at the airport, I thought I was just going on a short trip to see my sister in Texas. I packed my bags, locked the door, and drove away like any other day. I never thought I'd come back to hear the very people I loved plotting against me. I stood there, clutching my phone, listening as they whispered. Each word was like a knife carving into my chest. She won't know the difference, Jessica said, laughing softly. We'll make her sign the papers. Tell her it's just routine. She's old. She won't question it. Old. That word burned in my ears. They didn't see me. They didn't know I was right there, just a few feet away. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they might hear it. And then, suddenly, Jessica's voice dropped lower. What if she finds out about the account? The one he left for her? Michael hesitated. I could hear it in his voice. She won't. I'll make sure of it. That money is ours now. She doesn't need it. My hand tightened around the phone. An account? Money I didn't even know about? My husband had left me something, and my own son was trying to hide it from me. I wanted to burst in right then, to scream, to demand answers. But something in me said no. Not yet. Because this time, Maggie wasn't going to be silent. This time, I was going to listen. And I was going to record. And when the time was right, they would learn what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted most. But just as I took a step back, the floor creaked beneath me. Their voices stopped. Silence. Then Michael said, "Did you hear that?" My heart dropped into my stomach. "Did you hear that?" Michael's voice was sharp, suspicious. My blood froze. My heel had pressed against the old wooden floorboard near the hallway. The one Daniel always promised to fix, but never got around to. The creak echoed in my ears like a gunshot. Jessica hissed, "It's probably the wind. Don't start panicking." But I knew my son. Michael wasn't the type to brush things off. I saw the shadow of his feet shifting under the crack of light from the kitchen door. My phone was still recording in my hand, screen glowing faintly. My fingers hovered over the lock button, ready to stuff it in my pocket. Every muscle in my body screamed, "Don't move." Seconds dragged on like hours. I barely breathed. Finally, Jessica sighed. "Relax. No one's here. Finish what you were saying." I heard the scrape of a chair. Michael sat back down, but I could tell from his tone he wasn't convinced. "We need to be careful. One mistake and everything falls apart." I eased back one step, then another, my heart beating against my ribs, so hard I thought it might give me away. They went on talking, lower now, like they were suddenly more aware of themselves. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough. Something about forged signatures, lawyers, and a meeting scheduled for next week. Each word burned into my mind. I slipped out the front door as quietly as I had entered, pulling it shut without a sound. Only when I reached my car did I let out the breath I'd been holding. My knees gave way, and I sank into the driver's seat, shaking. For a moment, I considered driving away and pretending I had heard nothing. At 65, my heart wasn't built for war. But then Daniel's face came to me, his smile, his voice telling me, "Maggie, don't let anyone push you out of what's yours." I wiped the tears from my cheeks and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. They thought I was weak. They thought age had made me blind. But they were wrong. I had evidence now. Still, I couldn't rush. If I confronted them too soon, they'd find a way to spin it. I needed to think. I needed allies. So instead of heading to the airport, I drove 2 towns over to a small diner Daniel and I used to love. The neon sign flickered, the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. I sat in a booth by the window, pulled out my phone, and replayed the recording. The voices were clear. Too clear. My stomach twisted as I listened to my own son plotting against me. But mixed with that heartbreak was a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Determination. I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I hadn't called in years, Linda. My best friend from high school. A woman who had been by my side during our early vineyard days, who knew my son as well as anyone. Life had pulled us in different directions, but one thing I remembered about Linda, she didn't scare easy. My finger hovered over her number, but before I could press it, a message flashed across my screen. It was from Michael. "Mom, did you forget something? Thought I heard the door earlier." My breath caught. He suspected. I set the phone down on the table, my hands trembling. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I looked out the window at the people passing by. Young couples laughing, A father carrying his little girl, an older man walking his dog. Ordinary lives. I wondered if they knew how quickly trust could break. How the people you raised, the ones you'd give your life for, could turn and carve out your heart without a second thought. The waitress came by, a girl no older than 20, with kind eyes and a tired smile. "Coffee, ma'am." "Yes, please," I said softly. She poured it and left me alone. But her kindness, that simple act, reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. Goodness still existed. Not everyone was like Michael and Jessica. Some people cared. Some people treated others with respect, even strangers. I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me. For hours, I sat there, planning, thinking. I replayed the recording over and over, each time making mental notes of what they said. I thought of lawyers, of how to secure Daniel's will, of how to protect the vineyard. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. But just when I began to calm down, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Jessica. "Hi, Maggie. Just checking in. Michael said he thought you might have stopped by. Hope everything's okay. Call us when you can." Her tone was sweet. Too sweet. Like honey covering poison. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I saved both her voicemail and Michael's text. Everything was evidence now. As the sun dipped low, I finally gathered my things and paid my bill. The waitress smiled at me again, and I slipped a generous tip under the cup. Daniel always believed in paying kindness forward. On the drive back to my sister's, my mind was buzzing. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. It was manipulation. And it was war. But the scariest part wasn't what they had already planned. It was what I didn't know yet. Because when I reached my sister's house and opened my overnight bag, I found something that made my blood run cold. Inside, buried under my clothes, was an envelope I hadn't packed. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of Daniel's will. But the names on it weren't the same. My hands trembled as I held the paper, my eyes scanning the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. It looked almost identical to Daniel's will. The same fonts, the same legal phrases, even his signature at the bottom. But the details were wrong. Terribly wrong. Where the original will had left the vineyard to me, this copy named Michael as the sole inheritor. Where Daniel had written that I would retain control of the retirement accounts, the forged version said Jessica would manage them on behalf of the family. And as for me, I was given nothing more than a modest allowance to sustain her remaining years. I felt my chest tighten, anger and grief tangling into one unbearable knot. Daniel would never have written this. Never. He loved me too much, trusted me too deeply. We built every brick of that life together. He would never reduce me to a charity case in my own home. The question that burned in my mind was this: how did it get into my bag? I hadn't packed it. I was sure. I had folded Daniel's real will myself and left it carefully on the kitchen counter before leaving for the airport. Which meant only one thing: Michael and Jessica knew. They knew I was on to them, and they wanted me to find this. It was a message, a threat, a way of saying, "We're already ahead of you." I sank into the bed at my sister Carol's house, the paper crumpling slightly in my grip. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. This wasn't just about greed. This was war. Carol knocked softly on the door before entering. "Maggie, you've been quiet. Everything okay?" I quickly folded the forged will and shoved it under a sweater in my bag. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. But Carol wasn't fooled. She studied me with the same eyes she'd had since childhood, the ones that could see straight through me. "You're not fine. Tell me what's going on." For a moment, I wanted to spill everything. To hand her the phone, let her hear the recording, show her the fake will, cry on her shoulder like I used to when we were kids. But then I remembered Michael was her nephew too. And while Carol was kind, she was also cautious. If she panicked and confronted him too soon, it could ruin everything. So I shook my head and said, "I'm just tired. Long day." She frowned but didn't press further. Instead, she hugged me tight. "Well, you're safe here. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." Safe. The word rang in my ears long after she left the room. Was I safe? Could I be, with my own son working against me? That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Michael. The birthday parties, the family dinners, the promises he'd made to take care of me after Daniel died. Were those words ever real? Or had he been planning this for years, waiting for the day he could take control? At dawn, I finally gave up on sleep and pulled out my phone. The recording from yesterday sat there, waiting. I pressed play again. Hearing it in the stillness of the morning was even worse. Their voices sounded colder, more deliberate. I paused at the part where Jessica said, "We'll make her sign the papers. Tell her it's just routine." Routine. That word echoed in my head like a drumbeat. They were planning to trick me, to put documents in front of me that looked harmless and get me to sign away everything. And if I resisted? Jessica's laugh still rang in my ears, mocking, cruel. I pressed stop and closed my eyes. No, they wouldn't win. Not this time. Later that morning, while Carol was busy in the garden, I slipped out and drove to town. My first stop was the bank. Daniel had done business with them for decades, and the manager, Mr. Reynolds, had always been kind to us. If anyone could help me make sense of things, it was him. When I walked in, the smell of polished wood and fresh paper filled the air. Mr. Reynolds, a gray-haired man with warm eyes, greeted me with a handshake. "Maggie, it's been too long. I'm so sorry for your loss. How are you holding up?" I forced a smile. "I'm managing, but I need your help." I slid the forged will across the desk. His brows furrowed as he studied it. "Where did you get this?" "That's what I want to know," I said. "Because it's not real. Daniel would never sign something like this." Mr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses, flipping the pages carefully. "You're right. Something about this doesn't sit well. Look here. This signature is identical to one from 10 years ago. No natural variation. It looks copied." My stomach dropped. A forged signature. Exactly what I feared. "Do you think Michael is behind this?" I asked quietly. Mr. Reynolds hesitated. "Maggie, I can't make accusations, but I will say this. You need to secure the real will. If someone is trying to introduce this version, they'll do it through the courts, and once it's filed, undoing it will be messy." I nodded, my mind racing. "The real will is at home, but I don't know if it's safe anymore." "Then put it somewhere it is safe. A safety deposit box, a lawyer's office, anywhere but your house." I left the bank with my head spinning, but my resolve hardening. Mr. Reynolds was right. I had to act fast. Driving back, I felt a strange mix of fear and power. Fear, because I was fighting my own son. Power, because for the first time, I wasn't going to roll over and take it. But when I pulled into Carol's driveway, that fragile sense of safety shattered. Because sitting on the porch, waiting for me was Michael. Michael was sitting on Carol's porch like he owned the place, one ankle crossed casually over his knee, his phone in his hand. He looked up as I parked, his lips curling into the same smile that used to melt my heart when he was a boy asking for candy. But now it felt different. Cold. Calculated. "Hey, Mom," he said, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Wasn't sure where you went. Thought I'd stop by and check on you." My pulse quickened. He had never once just stopped by in the past year, not without a reason. I forced a smile. "Michael, what a surprise." He stood, straightened his jacket, and stepped closer. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. You kind of rushed off yesterday. Everything good?" Every word was wrapped in false concern, but his eyes betrayed him. They were searching me, sharp, probing, as if trying to see whether I knew something I wasn't supposed to. I clutched my purse tighter, the forge will hidden deep inside, my phone with the recording only inches away. "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just needed some time." He tilted his head, studying me. "Time? For what?" I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. "To think." His jaw tightened, just for a second. Then that smile returned, smoother than ever. "Of course. You've been through a lot. I get it." The door creaked open behind me, and Carol stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Michael," she said, her tone polite, but cool. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Hi, Aunt Carol," he replied. wrapping his charm around her like a silk ribbon. I was just checking on Mom. Wanted to make sure she's settling in okay. Carol gave me a quick glance, one that said she wasn't buying it either. She's fine. We've been taking care of each other. Michael nodded, his eyes flicking between us. He wasn't convinced. Well, he said finally, stepping back. That's good to hear. Listen, Mom, I'll call you later, okay? We should catch up. Maybe go over some things, paperwork, bills, that sort of stuff. Paperwork. The word landed heavy between us, carrying more meaning than he probably realized. I nodded, my smile frozen. Sure, Michael. Later. He leaned in, kissed my cheek, cold, perfunctory, and whispered so softly only I could hear, "Don't do anything stupid." Then he turned, waved at Carol, and walked off the porch, his car tires crunching against the gravel as he pulled away. I stood there, my heart hammering, the spot on my cheek burning where his lips had brushed. His words echoed in my ears, a warning cloaked as advice. Carol frowned. "Maggie, what's going on?" That boy looked like he was here on a mission. I sank into one of the porch chairs, suddenly exhausted. "You have no idea," I murmured. She sat across from me, her eyes narrowing. "Then tell me. Whatever it is, you can't carry it alone." I hesitated, weighing the risks. But the look in her eyes, the same look she gave me when we were kids sneaking cookies from the jar, was too much. She wouldn't judge me. She wouldn't run to Michael. She would stand by me, the way she always had. So I told her everything. The whispers I overheard. The recording. The forged will that showed up in my bag. The threat hidden in Michael's kiss. By the time I finished, Carol's face was pale, her hands clenched into fists. "That snake," she hissed. "Your own son. Maggie, this isn't just greedy, it's criminal." "I know," I whispered. My voice cracked, tears threatening again. But he's still my boy. I keep asking myself, what did I do wrong? Did I spoil him too much? Did I not teach him the right things? Carol reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Don't you dare blame yourself. You gave that boy everything. This is on him, not you." I nodded, though the guilt still gnawed at me. For the rest of the afternoon, Carol and I made plans. She insisted I put the real will somewhere safe. We talked about finding a lawyer, someone trustworthy, outside of Michael's reach. I even showed her the recording, and the look on her face hardened like stone. "You've got him," she said firmly. "Don't let him scare you into silence. You fight back." Her words lit a fire in me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a helpless old woman. I felt like a mother ready to defend what was hers, what Daniel had left for me. That night, I lay awake again, but this time not from fear. From strategy. I thought of Daniel's vineyard, of the workers who depended on it, of the memories built on that soil. I thought of my husband's voice telling me not to let anyone push me out. I promised him silently I won't. The next morning, Carol and I drove to town. I went straight to Mr. Reynolds at the bank and arranged for Daniel's reel, to be placed in a safety deposit box. My hand shook as I slid it into the metal drawer. But once it clicked shut, relief washed over me. At least that part was safe. From there, we met with an attorney recommended by one of Carol's friends. Her name was Susan Miller, a sharp woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense air. She listened carefully as I explained everything, her pen flying across the notepad. When I played the recording for her, her eyebrows shot up. "Mrs. Turner," she said, "this is serious. What your son and his wife are discussing could be considered fraud, maybe even elder abuse. You have evidence, and that's powerful. But you'll need to move carefully. If they sense you're preparing a case, they could destroy documents, cover their tracks." I nodded, my stomach churning. "So what do I do?" Susan leaned forward, her voice firm. "You keep pretending you don't know. Smile when they visit. Let them think you're falling for it. Meanwhile, I'll start building your case. When the time comes, we'll hit them with everything at once." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time, I had an ally who wasn't just emotional support, but a weapon. As Carol and I left the office, I felt a strange mix of dread and hope. The road ahead would be ugly, but I wasn't alone anymore. Still, the danger lingered in the shadows, and I didn't have to wait long for it to strike. Because that night, as I prepared for bed at Carol's house, I noticed something strange. My purse, the one I had kept by my side all day, was unzipped, and inside, tucked neatly on top of my wallet, was another envelope. I pulled it out with shaking hands, my heart pounding. This time, it wasn't a forged will. It was a photograph of me, standing outside the lawyer's office. The photograph slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor like a feather, but the weight of it hit me harder than a stone. My face stared back up at me, captured mid-step as I left Susan Miller's law office earlier that day. My heart slammed against my ribs. Someone had followed me. Not just followed, watched, photographed, and then, like some sick warning, slipped the proof into my purse without me even noticing. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the sheet. My mind reeled. When? How? Carol had been with me nearly the whole day. Had someone brushed past me in the street? Bumped into me at the cafe when we stopped for lunch? The truth clawed at me, Michael knew. He knew I'd gone to a lawyer, which meant the game had changed. I picked the photo back up, staring at the glossy paper until my vision blurred with tears. I wasn't safe. Not at Carol's, not anywhere. My own son wasn't just plotting behind my back. He was watching me like a hawk, making sure I stayed in his cage. The door creaked and Carol peeked in. Maggie, you all right? I thought I heard something. I wiped my face quickly, shoving the photo under my sweater. I'm fine, I said, forcing my voice to steady. But Carol knew me too well. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and folded her arms. Don't lie to me. What happened? For a moment, I considered keeping it to myself. Why drag her deeper into this mess? But the weight of it was too much to bear alone. My hands trembled as I pulled the photo out and handed it to her. Her eyes widened. Good Lord. Maggie, they're watching you. I nodded, my throat tight. I don't know how or when. But yes, this was in my purse. Carol's face hardened. This isn't just family greed anymore. This is intimidation. They're trying to scare you. And it's working, I whispered. My whole body shook as the image of Michael's cold smile replayed in my mind. I keep asking myself, how did we get here? How did my little boy turn into this? Carol sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Some people let money rot them from the inside out. Don't you dare blame yourself. Her comfort helped, but the fear gnawed at me. If Michael knew I'd gone to a lawyer, what would he do next? Try to discredit me? Cut me off? Or worse, that night, I barely slept, every creak of the old house setting my nerves on edge. I half expected Michael to burst through the door, demanding answers, waving the forged will in my face. But morning came quietly, sunlight spilling through the curtains as though nothing had changed. Carol insisted we call Susan immediately. When I showed Susan the photograph, her jaw tightened. This confirms it, she said. They're watching you. They want you to feel powerless. I swallowed. And what do? You don't let them see you sweat, Susan replied firmly. If you confront them too soon, they'll twist it. Let me handle the legal side. You stay calm, keep collecting evidence, and act like you don't know. If they're sloppy enough to leave this in your purse, they'll slip again. Her confidence steadied me, but only for a moment, because beneath her calm voice, I could see the truth in her eyes. This was dangerous. On the drive back to Carol's, I stared out the window at the California hills rolling past. The vineyards, the golden fields, the small towns where neighbors still waved at each other. I thought of Daniel, of the life we built, of the kindness he carried with him everywhere. And I thought of Michael, the boy who used to run through those vineyards barefoot, laughing, sticky with grape juice. How had greed stolen him from me? By the time we pulled into Carol's driveway, I'd made a decision. Fear would not control me. Not anymore. If Michael wanted to play games, so be it. I would play, too. And when the time came, I'd win. That evening, I sat on the porch, sipping tea, letting the warm summer air wrap around me. For a brief moment, I allowed myself peace. Carol hummed softly in the kitchen, the smell of apple pie drifting through the open window. But just as I began to relax, headlights swept across the driveway. A car pulled in, Michael's car. I stiffened, my teacup rattling against the saucer. He hadn't called, hadn't warned me. The engine cut off and the door slammed. His footsteps crunched on the gravel, slow and deliberate. Carol stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on a towel. "What's he doing here?" she whispered. I shook my head, my stomach twisting into knots. "I don't know." Michael appeared in the glow of the porch light, his face unreadable. He shoved his hands into his pockets and looked at me with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "Evening, Mom," he said smoothly. "We need to talk." Michael stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his figure outlined by the yellow glow of the porch light. His smile was wrong, too tight, too rehearsed. "We need to talk," he repeated, his eyes fixed on me, not blinking. Carol stepped forward, her chin high. "It's late, Michael. Whatever you need can wait until morning." But Michael didn't even glance at her. His gaze stayed locked on me, steady and cold. "Mom, please. Just a few minutes." The word please sounded hollow, like an actor reading from a script. I forced myself to meet his stare. "Fine," I said quietly. "Let's talk." Carol frowned. "Maggie." "It's all right," I interrupted, though my stomach churned. "Let him speak." Reluctantly, Carol stepped back, but she didn't go inside. She leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Michael climbed the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, as though he wanted me to hear his power in the sound. When he reached the top, he didn't sit. He loomed over me, his hands still in his pockets. "You left in a hurry the other day," he said casually. "Everything okay?" I sipped my tea to steady my hands. "I told you I needed some time to think." His smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "Think about what?" I shrugged, feigning calm. "Life. Your father. The vineyard. What happens next?" He studied me for a long moment, then leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "You know, Mom, sometimes too much thinking just makes things harder. Sometimes it's easier to let other people handle the details." I swallowed hard. "Details like what?" He leaned even closer, so close I could smell his cologne, sharp and expensive, like the will. My heart skipped. Carol stiffened beside me, but I raised a hand slightly, signaling her not to speak. "The will," I repeated, my voice steady though my chest pounded. "What about it?" Michael's smile thinned. "You don't need to worry about it. Jessica and we've got it under control. We'll make sure everything's taken care of." I set my teacup down on the table with deliberate calm. "And what does taken care of mean?" He finally dropped his smile, his face tightening. "It means you don't have to stress yourself over paperwork and lawyers. You've been through enough, Mom. You're tired. You should let us handle things." The words dripped with false concern, but underneath I heard the command, "Step aside." Anger flared in me, but I swallowed it back. Susan's words echoed in my mind, "Pretend you don't know. Collect evidence." So I forced a small smile. "I appreciate your concern, Michael, but your father trusted me with this, and I intend to honor that." For the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared. "Mom," he said sharply, "you don't understand how complicated this is. If you try to manage it on your own, you could ruin everything. Do you really want to risk that?" Carol stepped forward, her voice like steel. "She's not alone, Michael. Don't talk to your mother like she's incompetent." Michael's eyes flicked to her, icy. "This isn't your business, Aunt Carol." "Oh, it sure as hell is," she snapped. "You're not going to bully her." I placed a hand on Carol's arm, trying to calm the storm. "It's all right," I murmured, though inside I was shaking. Michael exhaled sharply, then straightened, his mask slipping back into place. "Fine. Have it your way. But remember, Mom, Jessica and I just want what's best for you. Don't make things harder than they need to be." With that, he turned and descended the porch steps, his footsteps heavy against the gravel. He climbed into his car and drove off into the night without another word. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Carol spun toward me, her face flushed with anger. "That boy, he's threatening you, Maggie. Can't you see it?" I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. "I see it," I whispered. "But we have to be careful. If we push too soon, we'll lose everything." Carol paced the porch like a caged lion. "So what now?" "Just wait for him to make his move." I looked out into the dark road where his car had vanished, my heart aching with a mother's grief. "Yes," I said softly, "because when he does, I'll be ready." The next few days passed in a tense blur. Michael didn't call, didn't text, didn't visit. But the silence was worse than confrontation. Every ring of the phone, every car passing outside Carol's window made my stomach knot. I spent hours with Susan, going over every document Daniel had left. She explained the process, the loopholes Michael might try to exploit, the ways he could forge or manipulate. Each meeting left me both terrified and more determined. But then something happened that none of us expected. On the fourth day, as I sat in Susan's office, her secretary walked in holding a thick envelope. "This came by courier," she said, "addressed to Mrs. Turner." I frowned, taking it with trembling hands. The envelope was unmarked, no return address, just my name. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the contents. My breath caught. Inside was a stack of photographs, dozens of them, all of me. Me at the grocery store, me at the diner, me walking with Carol in her garden, me unlocking the door to Susan's office, everywhere I had been in the past week. My hand shook so violently that the photos spilled across the desk. Carol gasped, covering her mouth. Susan's face hardened, her eyes flashing with anger. "This isn't just intimidation anymore," she said. "This is surveillance. They're tracking your every move." I stared at the photographs, my vision blurring. I felt stripped, exposed, hunted. And then I saw the last photo in the stack. It wasn't of me. It was of Carol, standing on her porch, smiling as she waved to me. And scrawled across the bottom in black marker were 3 chilling words. "She's next too." My hand trembled as I held the photograph with the black marker words, "She's next too." Carol's face went pale when she saw it. "Maggie," she whispered, "they're threatening me now?" Susan's lips pressed into a hard line. She gathered the scattered photos back into a neat pile, her movements sharp and controlled, though I could see the fire in her eyes. "This isn't just intimidation anymore," she said. "It's escalation. They want you to feel surrounded. They want to scare you into surrender." Carol took the photo from my hand and stared at it for a long moment. Her shoulders squared. "I'm not going to let them scare me," she said firmly. But I could hear the tremor beneath her words. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "First me now, you. If they're watching us this closely, who else do they know about?" Susan leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "That's exactly the point. They want you to question everyone, everything. They want to isolate you. But you are not alone, Maggie. Not while I'm here. Not while your sister's here." Carol gave a small, resolute nod. "Damn right." I looked between them, my heart aching with gratitude. But fear still coiled in my stomach like a living thing. If Michael and Jessica are behind this, how far would they go? Would they actually hurt someone? Susan held my gaze. "I've seen people do terrible things for money. But that's why we need to be 2 steps ahead." I sank back in my chair, the weight of everything pressing down. My own son, the boy I once held in my arms, teaching him to tie his shoes, wiping his tears when he fell off his bike. Could he truly be the one orchestrating this terror? The answer, deep in my gut, was yes. Susan drew a deep breath. "From now on, we don't assume you're safe anywhere. Maggie, you don't go anywhere alone. Carol, you don't either. We'll start keeping records, times, dates, locations. We'll build a file. If anything happens, we'll have a trail to take to the authorities." Carol snorted. "Should have called the cops already." "Not yet," Susan said firmly. "Right now, we have no proof this came from Michael or Jessica. If we go to the police now, they'll brush it off as a family dispute. We need hard evidence." Her words chilled me, but I knew she was right. For the next few days, Carol and I moved like shadows, never apart, always checking over our shoulders. I slept with my phone under my pillow, waking at every creak of the old farmhouse. Carol left lights on in every room, something she never used to do. Even her laugh, once loud and easy, had softened. Still, life pressed forward in little ways. The vineyard needed tending. Bills needed paying. Susan urged me to carry on as normal to avoid tipping my hand. "If they think you're cracking, they'll push harder," she warned. So I forced myself to smile at neighbors, to wave at the mailman, to stand in the vineyard rows with a basket of grapes as though my world hadn't been turned upside down. But every time I felt eyes on me from the tree line or noticed a car slowing near the property, my blood went cold. One evening, Carol and I sat on her porch swing, trying to breathe in the cool Virginia air. Fireflies blinked in the grass. For a brief moment, it almost felt normal again. Carol nudged me. Remember when we used to sit out here as girls? Counting stars? I smiled faintly. We made wishes on every single one. And you always wished for the same thing, she said with a soft laugh. A family full of love. The ache in my chest nearly split me in two. And now my voice broke. Carol reached over, covering my hand with hers. Don't blame yourself, Maggie. Michael made his own choices. You gave him love. You gave him everything. Tears blurred my vision. But what kind of mother raises a son who can do this? Carol squeezed my hand tighter. A good mother. A mother who tried. Don't you dare carry his sins as your own. I turned my face away, wiping quickly. I didn't want her to see me unravel. That night, I fell into a fitful sleep on Carol's couch. Around midnight, I woke to a faint sound, gravel crunching outside. My pulse spiked. Slowly, I crept to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek out. A dark SUV idled at the end of the driveway, headlights off. I froze, barely breathing. For several long minutes, it didn't move. Just sat there, engine humming low. Then, as if it knew I was watching, it flicked its headlights once, blinding in the dark, and drove off. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, Susan came by. I told her about the SUV, and she listened carefully, jotting notes in her file. They're testing you, she said, seeing how much pressure you can take. Her voice hardened. We'll give them something else to focus on. A reason to slip up. What do you mean? I asked. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. A trap. And so the plan began. Susan suggested we plant false information, something that would tempt Michael and Jessica into revealing themselves. If they thought I was moving the will or transferring assets, they might make a mistake. I agreed, though fear gnawed at me. But I also knew Susan was right. We couldn't just wait forever, cowering. That afternoon, Susan had me make a call within earshot of Carol, pretending to arrange a meeting with a notary in town to move sensitive documents. Carol played along beautifully, asking loud questions about where I'd keep the papers. And sure enough, the very next evening, the trap was sprung. When we returned from dinner in town, we found Carol's front door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. Stay behind me, Carol whispered, her voice trembling. She grabbed a heavy flashlight from the porch and pushed the door open wider. The living room light was on. Papers lay scattered across the floor. We stepped inside cautiously, my heart hammering so loudly I thought they must hear it. Then Carol gasped. On the coffee table lay a single object. My late husband Daniel's will. The same document I had hidden at Susan's office. And scrawled across the front page in thick red ink was one chilling word. Liar. The word screamed at me from the page. Liar. I staggered back a step, my breath catching in my throat. Carol steadied me with a hand on my arm, though her own face was pale. This isn't possible, I whispered. The will was locked in Susan's office. Carol glanced at me, wide-eyed. Then how the hell is it sitting here? Before I could answer, Susan crouched over the table. She wore latex gloves she carried in her bag, always prepared. Carefully, she lifted the will by the edges, inspecting the red scrawl. Her face was unreadable, but her silence made my stomach churn. Finally, she spoke. They wanted you to find this. They wanted you to know they can reach anywhere, even places you think are secure. My hand shook so badly I had to clasp them together. Susan, are you saying someone got into your office? Susan didn't look at me. Or someone let them in. The words sliced through the room like a blade. Carol gasped. My heart sank. You mean? I started, but I couldn't finish. Yes, Susan said grimly. It means there's a leak. Someone close to us. The thought was unbearable. I had trusted Susan with everything. And now, even in her guarded expression, doubt flickered. Not in me, but in the world around us. Carol wrapped her arms tightly around herself. Maggie, this is too much. They're everywhere. Watching, listening. What if they're in this house right now? Her fear was my fear. too. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. We'll be okay. We have to be. Susan set the will back on the table. We'll treat this as evidence. Don't touch it again. I'll take it back to my office. No. Better yet, I'll put it in a secure box somewhere they won't expect. A bank deposit box. Her voice was steady, but I caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Anger? Fear? Or maybe both. The rest of the night passed in a haze. None of us slept. Carol brewed pot after pot of coffee, her hands restless. I sat in the corner, staring at the walls, half expecting shadows to move. Susan scribbled notes in her file, her jaw tight. By morning, the exhaustion was crushing. Yet I couldn't close my eyes, not even for a moment. Not when I knew someone had touched Daniel's will. Someone who wanted me broken. For days, the unease grew worse. I jumped at phone calls. I avoided the vineyard workers, wondering if one of them had been paid off. Even my own neighbors, people I'd share pies and Christmas cards with, suddenly looked suspicious. The betrayal cut deep, not only from Michael and Jessica, but from the creeping thought that someone I trusted might be helping them. One afternoon, Susan pulled me aside. "Maggie," she said quietly, "there's something I need to ask you, and I want you to be honest." I stiffened. "Of course. Has anyone else seen the original will? Anyone besides me, you and Daniel's attorney?" I shook my head. "No. I kept it hidden. You know that." Susan studied me for a long moment. Her gaze wasn't unkind, but it was sharp, searching. "All right," she said finally. "Then that narrows things down." Her question lingered in my mind long after she left. Did she doubt me? I didn't want to believe it. But with everything happening, I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. That night, as I sat alone in Carol's living room, I picked up my phone and scrolled through old family photos. Michael as a boy, his gap-toothed grin. Jessica on her wedding day, her hand linked with mine. Memories that should have been sweet now felt poisoned. Tears blurred my eyes. How had it come to this? How had my own son become my enemy? A sudden sound jolted me, a ping from my phone. A new message. My heart stopped when I saw the sender, an unknown number. With trembling hands, I opened it. A single image filled the screen. It was me, asleep on Carol's couch, taken last night. My stomach turned to ice. I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. The picture glowed on my phone screen, cruel and cold. My own face, slack with sleep, my hands folded under my cheek. Carol's throw blanket tucked under my chin. The same throw I had used last night. The timestamp in the corner made my blood run cold. Just past 3 a.m. I sat frozen, unable to breathe. The thought clawed its way into my mind. Someone had stood in this room, right where I was now, and leaned close enough to capture my face. I heard Carol's footsteps coming down the hall. She held 2 mugs of tea, her robe pulled tight around her. When she saw my expression, her smile faltered. "Maggie, what is it?" My hand shook as I turned the phone toward her. The mugs clattered to the floor, spilling tea across the rug. Carol's face went pale. "Oh my God." Her voice was barely a whisper. They were here. In this house. I could only nod, clutching the phone like it might burn me. Within 20 minutes, Susan arrived, hair pulled into a messy bun, her briefcase swinging at her side. She looked at the photo once, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This changes everything," she said flatly. "It's no longer intimidation. It's escalation." Carol was pacing, her hands twisting in her robe. "How did they get in?" "I locked every door, every window." Susan didn't answer right away. She walked slowly around the room, scanning the walls, the windows, even the floor. Then she crouched near the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. A sliver of wood was chipped near the lock. Barely visible, but enough. "They forced their way in," she said grimly. Quietly. Professional. I wrapped my arms around myself. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice cracking. Susan straightened, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling a contact of mine. A private security firm. Retired police, military. People who know how to handle situations like this." Carol gasped. "That's serious?" Susan's eyes met mine. You're being stalked, Maggie. They want you rattled. They want you too scared to fight back. We can't let them win. I swallowed hard, nodding. Still, the hours that followed dragged heavy with dread. The security team came that afternoon. A tall man named Harris and a woman named Lila, both stone-faced, both carrying gear I couldn't name. They swept the house, checked the locks, even inspected the yard with flashlights though the sun was still high. This isn't random, Harris said. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. No fingerprints, no footprints, but we'll find a way to catch them. I should have felt reassured. But as night fell again, the fear only grew worse. Carol's house no longer felt like safety. It felt like a trap. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, flinching at every creak and groan of the house settling. My phone sat beside me, dark screen turned over, but I couldn't stop imagining it lighting up again with another photo. Morning came, and with it Susan. She looked more tired than usual, but her eyes burned with determination. I've been digging, she said without preamble. About Jessica. About her family. My stomach tightened. And Susan dropped a folder on the table. Inside were clippings, property records, old photographs. She flipped one toward me. It was Jessica's brother, a man I barely knew, who hadn't even attended their wedding. He stood in a grainy photo, a tattoo creeping up his neck. He's done time, Susan said. Breaking and entering. Fraud. And guess what? He was released 6 months ago, right around the time Michael started pressing you about the will. The room tilted. Carol let out a sharp breath. You think he's the one breaking in? I whispered. Susan's jaw tightened. I don't think. I know. For a moment, silence pressed heavy between us. Then, almost as if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. A new message. I reached for it with trembling fingers. This time it wasn't a photo. It was a video. I tapped play. The screen lit up with footage of me again, this time standing in Daniel's old study, holding the will in my hands. But it wasn't the present. It was from weeks ago. A video from inside my own home. The video played on my phone, grainy but clear enough to freeze the blood in my veins. There I was, standing in Daniel's study weeks ago. I remembered the night exactly. I had opened the drawer where his will was kept, touched the envelope, and whispered a prayer before tucking it away again. But in the video, the camera was behind me, watching, recording. Carol covered her mouth with both hands. Oh my God, Maggie, that means. They've been in my house for weeks, I said, my voice hollow. Watching me. Susan took the phone from me, her eyes narrowing as she replayed the clip. She muttered something under her breath, then snapped her gaze to me. They installed hidden cameras. The room spun. My knees went weak, and I gripped the edge of the table. But how? I locked the doors. They had helped Susan cut in. They knew where to look, where to place it. This isn't just Michael's wife's brother snooping around. Someone gave them access. Carol shook her head furiously. Who? Who would help them do something this vile? Susan hesitated, then said, think. Who's been in your house recently, Maggie? Maintenance workers? Delivery? Anyone you trusted? I opened my mouth, but no words came. My mind raced back through faces. Plumbers, gardeners, even a sweet neighbor boy who once helped with groceries. Suddenly, each memory felt poisoned. Suspect. I don't know, I admitted, my throat tight. Susan exhaled slowly, pulling her notebook from her bag. We'll figure it out. But for now, you can't go back to that house. Not until every inch is swept clean. I nodded, my hands trembling. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Harris and Lila returned, carrying small detectors and black cases that clicked open with military precision. They promised to sweep my home the next morning, to search for every hidden camera, every wire, every bug. But as the hours crawled by, dread gnawed at me. My sanctuary had been invaded. My memories, my grief, my prayers, stolen, recorded, twisted into weapons against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Carol dozed off in the recliner beside me, her head tilted back, her soft snores filling the silence. I sat stiff on the couch, clutching a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the darkened TV screen. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak in the floor felt like a footstep. I kept picturing Michael and Jessica whispering to each other, watching my most private moments on a glowing screen, laughing, plotting. By dawn, I felt hollow, but I also felt something else. A spark. Anger. They thought they could scare me into silence. They thought they could strip away my dignity and leave me trembling in the corner. But they didn't know me. I was Daniel's wife. I had stood beside him through wars of business, betrayal from so-called friends, and the cruelty of life itself. I would not crumble now. When Susan arrived later that morning, I met her at the door. No more hiding, I told her. If they want a war, they'll get one. Her eyes lit with approval. That's the spirit, because I've been digging deeper and I found something. She set a folder on the table. Inside were documents, bank transfers, property deeds, financial trails that twisted like snakes across the page. Jessica's brother isn't working alone. Someone with money is backing him. Someone powerful enough to move large sums quietly. And guess where the money leads? My heart thudded. Where? Susan's lips pressed thin as she tapped the page. To Michael. The world seemed to stop. Carol gasped. I could only stare at the paper, bile rising in my throat. My own son. Not just standing by his wife. Not just turning a blind eye. He was paying for it. Funding the scheme. Financing the people breaking into my house. My voice came out cracked and small. He's behind it. Susan's face softened, but she didn't deny it. Yes, he is. For the first time in all of this, the tears came hot and fast. Not from fear, not from anger, but from heartbreak. My son, my boy, the one I had held as a baby, the one who used to run into my arms after school, who once swore he'd take care of me when I grew old. And now he was paying to destroy me. The room blurred as I buried my face in my hands. Carol wrapped her arms around me, whispering soft words, but I barely heard them. The only sound that cut through the fog was the buzz of my phone on the table. Another message. With shaking fingers, I opened it. It was a live feed of Michael, sitting in his car, parked just across the street, watching me. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the table. Carol snatched it up, her face paling as she looked at the screen. Maggie, it's him. He's right there. I didn't need to be told. My body already knew, my bones trembling with a truth my heart could barely stand. Michael, my son, across the street, idling in his car, staring straight at the house like a wolf waiting for the right moment to pounce. Susan pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. She cursed under her breath, her knuckles white around her notebook. He's been watching you this whole time, probably longer than we thought. I pressed a hand to my chest, struggling to breathe. My boy, my flesh and blood. What had Jessica done to him? What darkness had taken root inside the sweet child I raised? Carol's voice broke. What do we do? Susan turned sharply, her eyes fierce. We don't panic. We make him believe we're unaware. If he knows you've caught on, he'll bolt, and that will ruin everything. But the words felt like knives. Pretend? Hide. Sit still while my own son sat there plotting against me? No, I whispered, rising to my feet. Susan caught my arm. Maggie, don't. But I shook her off. My legs moved before my mind caught up, carrying me to the front door. My hand wrapped around the knob, heart pounding like thunder in my ears. Carol scrambled up, pleading. Please think about this. Too late. I threw the door open. The cold Ohio air rushed into my lungs as I stepped out onto the porch. Across the street, Michael's car headlights flicked on, twin beams cutting through the early morning haze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, mother and son. I raised my trembling hand, pointing straight at him. My voice cracked but carried across the empty street. I know what you're doing, Michael. The engine roared to life. The car lurched forward, tires squealing against the pavement. For one terrifying second, I thought he might drive straight at me. But instead, he sped off, disappearing down the road like a shadow fleeing daylight. Silence fell. My chest heaved. My knees buckled, and I gripped the porch railing to stay upright. Carol rushed to my side, tears streaking her cheeks. Susan followed, muttering curses at herself. You shouldn't have done that, she said harshly. You spooked him. Now he'll be careful. But I couldn't regret it. I needed him to see my face, to hear my voice, to know I wasn't afraid anymore. Inside, Susan paced like a caged animal, already typing furiously on her laptop. We have to move fast now. He knows you're onto him. He'll change tactics, maybe even escalate. Carol sat me down on the couch, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. Sweetheart, are you okay? I nodded weakly, though every part of me felt shattered. My heart ached in a way no doctor could ever heal. To see my boy like that, to know he had chosen this path. But beneath the sorrow, that spark of anger grew into flame. If Michael wanted war, I would give him one. The rest of the day blurred with whispered strategy. Susan made calls to contacts I didn't know she had. Carol stayed close, watching me like I might fall apart at any moment. By evening, exhaustion weighed on me like chains. I curled up in bed at Carol's house, the sounds of her moving quietly in the kitchen drifting through the walls. For the first time in weeks, I prayed not for strength, but for answers. Why, Michael? Why would you do this to me? Sleep came slowly. My dreams were jagged, filled with shadows of Daniel, Michael as a boy, Jessica's sharp laughter. I woke in the night to a noise at the window, a soft tap. My breath caught. I sat up slowly, peering into the dark. Another tap. I crept to the window, pulling the curtain aside just an inch. My heart stuttered. There was an envelope stuck under the wiper blade of Carol's car. And in the shadows of the streetlight, a figure stood watching. Not Michael. Someone taller, broader, a stranger. Before I could react, the man melted into the darkness, vanishing into the night. The porch light buzzed faintly as Carol pulled her robe tighter around her and stared at the envelope wedged beneath her car's wiper blade. The night was still, almost too still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Susan's voice was sharp as broken glass. Don't touch it yet. She crouched down, scanning the street in both directions, her hand hovering near the small flashlight clipped to her belt. If he left it, he wanted you to find it, which means it could be bait. I stood a step behind her, my pulse hammering in my ears. The image of that stranger's silhouette lingered in my mind. Broad shoulders, tall frame, the way he melted into the shadows like he belonged to them. It's just paper, Carol whispered nervously. Susan shook her head. Paper can carry more danger than bullets if it's in the wrong hands. But I couldn't wait. Every instinct screamed that whatever lay inside that envelope was meant for me. My hand shook as I stepped forward, ignoring Susan's protests. With a firm tug, I pulled it free. The paper was heavy, thick, not the kind you buy at a corner store. I slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. 3 photographs slipped out into my palm. The first was of me, taken from across the street, through the living room window. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, completely unaware. The second was of Carol. She was walking to the mailbox, her head turned, smiling at a neighbor. The third, my heart stopped, was of little Emily, Carol's granddaughter, holding a balloon outside her school. No, Carol gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A short note was scrawled on the back of the last photo in jagged handwriting. Stay quiet, or she gets hurt. The words burned into my eyes, my chest, my very soul. Carol sank onto the porch steps, her body shaking as sobs tore through her. I pulled her close, my own tears spilling freely. They won't touch her, I swore, though my voice trembled. I won't let them. Susan snatched the photos from my hand. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. This isn't Michael's style. He's reckless, greedy, yes. But this is organized. Calculated. Jessica. I spat, the name bitter on my tongue. Susan shook her head. She's cruel, but she doesn't have this kind of reach. This feels like someone else entirely. Someone she brought in to do the dirty work. The night pressed down on us, suffocating and heavy. For the first time, fear wrapped its fingers around my throat in a way even Michael's betrayal hadn't managed. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. They were going after the people I loved. Carol sobbed harder. Emily, she's just a child. She has nothing to do with this. I pulled her face into my hands, forcing her to look at me. Listen to me, Carol. They are trying to break us, but we will not give them that power. Not over Emily. Not over anyone. Susan slipped the photos back into the envelope and tucked it under her arm. We need to act fast. I'm calling in someone I trust, someone who can handle this kind of threat. But until then, you don't leave this house, not even for groceries. Understood? Carol nodded weakly, her tears still flowing. I stood on the porch, staring out into the darkness. My heart was torn open wider than I thought possible. Michael's betrayal was a wound. Yes, but this was a declaration of war. As the night dragged on, I found myself whispering into the silence of the guest room, praying Daniel could somehow hear me. Your son is lost, my love, and now strangers are circling us like wolves. But I won't break. For you, for our family, I'll fight until my last breath. The house was quiet when dawn crept in. Carol finally slept, her face still streaked with dried tears. Susan sat by the window, eyes sharp, a coffee mug in her hand like a weapon. I thought, for one fleeting moment, maybe the night had been just a nightmare. Until I stepped outside and saw the fresh message spray painted across Carol's garage in bold, dripping red letters. You can't hide forever. The red letters glared back at us in the early morning light, dripping down the garage door like blood that refused to dry. You can't hide forever. Carol stumbled backward, her hand pressed against her chest, as though the words had struck her physically. Oh my God. Emily, what if they? Stop, Susan snapped, her voice hard, her eyes scanning the street. That's what they want. Fear. If we let it control us, we've already lost. But fear was already there, gnawing at me, cold and relentless. Not for myself. I had been prepared for battles long before Michael and Jessica showed their fangs. But Emily, sweet. Innocent Emily, she didn't deserve the shadow hanging over her life. I turned toward Susan. You said you had someone you could call. Someone who could help. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She pulled a sleek black phone from her pocket and tapped quickly. Already done. He'll be here before noon. Carol's voice cracked. Who is he? Another cop? A lawyer? Please don't tell me it's more trouble walking through that door. Susan hesitated just a beat too long. Let's just say he doesn't wear a badge, but he knows how to make people disappear. Carol gasped. Disappear? That sounds dangerous. Susan cut in, her eyes flicking to the garage door again. So are the people who left that message. I tightened the robe around me, the morning breeze sharp against my skin. I wanted to protest, to insist we didn't need violence, that we could solve this through truth and justice. But the photos, the message, they had crossed a line that stripped me of the luxury of gentle solutions. Then we wait, I said, though my voice trembled. The hours dragged on like stones tied to our ankles. Carol busied herself scrubbing at the garage door, though the red paint only smeared into darker, angrier stains. Susan sat by the front window, her eyes never leaving the street. I brewed coffee, one pot after another, just to keep my hands from shaking. Every creak of the house made us jump. Every passing car felt like a predator circling its prey. Finally, just before noon, a black SUV pulled slowly into the driveway. The windows were tinted, the engine rumbling low like a growl. Carol froze, the sponge slipping from her hand. Susan straightened. He's here. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple dark jacket and jeans. His face was hard, but not unkind, creased at the edges, eyes sharp and calculating, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. Susan walked out to meet him first. Their handshake was firm, familiar. She leaned in, speaking low, her hand briefly gripping his arm in a way that told me this was not just a business connection. Carol clutched my sleeve. Who is he? I swallowed, watching as he finally turned toward us, his gaze landing directly on me. For a second, it felt like he could see right through me. All my fears, my doubts, my memories of Daniel, my quiet prayers whispered into the night. Susan led him up the porch steps. Eleanor, Carol, this is Mark. He's an old friend. Mark's voice was gravel, steady and calm. I've read the situation. You're in deeper than you realize. Whoever painted that door isn't playing games. They're marking territory. My stomach sank. Territory. He nodded. A warning, but also a claim. They're letting everyone know you belong to them now. Carol's knees buckled, and I barely caught her before she collapsed. We're not property, she cried. No, I whispered fiercely, holding her tight. We are not. Mark studied me for a long moment. Good, because if you're going to survive this, you'll need to be stronger than you've ever been. Susan placed a hand on his shoulder. Show her what you found. He pulled a small folder from inside his jacket and laid it on the porch table. Inside were more photographs, some of me, some of Carol, even one of Susan herself, all taken from angles that meant someone had been close, very close. And then, at the bottom of the pile, a single page torn from a notebook. Scrawled in the same jagged handwriting as the note on Emily's photo were 4 words that froze the blood in my veins. Daniel's death wasn't natural. The world tilted. My knees gave way. My hands clawed at the table for balance, but the strength drained from me like water slipping through cracks. Because if Daniel hadn't died, naturally, then everything I thought I knew, every ounce of grief I had carried, was about to shatter. The words blurred before my eyes, the ink running as though my tears were smudging the page. Daniel's death wasn't natural. I heard Carol's sob, sharp and broken, but it felt far away, like I was underwater. My mind clawed back through memories I had sealed in boxes, tied with grief and pain. Daniel collapsing in his study, the paramedics saying it was too late, the death certificate that listed heart failure. Had it all been a lie? Mark's voice cut through the fog. I know it's hard to hear, but whoever is behind this, they want you rattled, which means there's truth here. Susan knelt beside me, her hand firm on my arm. Eleanor, listen to me. We'll find out what really happened, but you need to breathe first. You're shaking. I forced in air, shallow and jagged. If Daniel didn't die naturally, then someone killed him. Mark didn't flinch. That's the implication. The house felt colder than I'd ever known. I wrapped my shawl tighter, staring at the photos spread across the table. Daniel had been strong, careful with his health. Yes, he worked long hours, but he wasn't careless. He had promised me retirement trips, grandchildren on his knee, golden years together. And now, a thought so dark it made me shiver. Maybe someone had stolen him from me on purpose. Carol wiped her face with trembling hands. But why? Why would anyone want Daniel gone? Susan's jaw tightened. Because of the will. Because he left everything in Eleanor's name instead of theirs. The memory struck like lightning. The night after the funeral, Michael had pushed me, gently at first, then angrily, about signing over management of the estate. Jessica's words, sugar-coated, "It'll be easier for you if we handle things." I had refused. At the time, I thought it was greed. But what if it was more than that? Mark gathered the papers into the folder again, his movements slow, deliberate. I'll look deeper. Autopsy records, medical files, people who were around Daniel in his final days. If there's a crack in the story, I'll find it. Carol shook her head, her voice thin. But it's been years. Won't everything be buried by now? Mark gave a humorless smile. That's the thing about secrets. They never stay buried. Silence fell over us like a suffocating blanket. I tried to sip my coffee, but it tasted bitter, metallic. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. For years, I had lived in grief, thinking it was fate. Now it felt like I had been mourning a lie. The hours that followed were slow, heavy. Susan insisted on staying close, keeping watch with Mark as he made calls I couldn't hear. Carol tried to distract me with old family albums, but even the photos of happier days cut deep. Daniel's laughing eyes, his arm draped around me at the lake house, Emily perched on his shoulders. By evening, the house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by questions too sharp to touch. That's when Susan's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. It's the county clerk's office. One of my contacts pulled the medical examiner's file. Mark leaned closer. Put it on speaker. A man's voice came through, low and hesitant. Susan, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but there were irregularities in Daniel Carter's report. The toxicology screen was missing from the official file. My breath hitched. Missing. The voice lowered. That's not all. The original notes, they were replaced. The handwriting doesn't match the examiner's. Someone tampered with it. The room tilted again. I gripped the edge of the table. Then it wasn't natural. The man hesitated, then whispered. From what little I saw in the older drafts, there were traces of something unusual. Not a heart condition, more like poison. The call ended abruptly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Carol buried her face in her hands. Susan cursed under her breath. Mark leaned back, his expression grim. But something inside me snapped into place. Not brokenness, not despair. No, it was sharper than that. Stronger. Revenge. I stood slowly, my legs steadier than I expected. They killed my husband. My voice trembled, but with rage, not fear. They killed him, and then they came for me. For Emily. For everything Daniel and I built. Susan's eyes softened, but her voice was steel. Then it's time we stop reacting and start fighting. Mark nodded. I can trace the money, the calls, find the proof. But Eleanor, you'll have to decide what happens when we corner them. I looked at the red paint still staining the garage door, the folder of photos, the empty seat at my table where Daniel should have been. I already know, I said, my voice low, dangerous. I'll take everything from them, just like they took Daniel from me. And then, as if summoned by the very words, headlights flashed across the living room window. A car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Mark's SUV. It wasn't Susan's sedan. It was Michael's, and he wasn't alone. The headlights cut across my living room, washing the walls in white. My heart pounded, so hard I could feel it in my throat. Michael's car door slammed, followed by another. Jessica's laugh floated through the night, sharp and careless, like they were arriving at a party instead of my doorstep. Susan moved quickly, grabbing my arm. Do you want us to stay hidden? No, I whispered, my voice steady, colder than I felt. I want them to see me. Mark moved to the corner of the room, hand hovering over his phone, ready to record. Carol clutched my hand so tight her knuckles turned white. But I didn't flinch. I stood tall, shawl draped over my shoulders as the front door opened without a knock. Michael strode in, Jessica behind him, her perfume filling the air. He stopped when he saw me, his face tightening for just a second before he smiled, that fake, rehearsed smile he always wore when he wanted something. Mom, we were just coming to check on you. Jessica tilted her head sweetly. Yes, we were worried after the incident with the door. You shouldn't be alone in this big house. Behind me, Mark tapped his phone, recording every word. I folded my hands calmly. Funny, you didn't seem worried when you tried to have me declared unfit, or when you painted threats on my walls, or when you whispered about taking everything I own while I was standing right behind you. Jessica's smile faltered. Michael's jaw clenched. What are you talking about? I reached for the folder on the table, sliding out the copies of the photos, the forged reports, the bank records Mark had traced. I laid them out one by one, the evidence of their greed, their betrayal, their violence. Michael's face went pale. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. You killed Daniel, I said, my voice trembling but strong. You poisoned your own father because you couldn't wait to get your hands on his money. And when I didn't roll over, you came after me. Jessica snapped, her voice sharp. You can't prove that. Mark stepped forward, holding up his phone. Oh, I think we can. And the county clerk's office is already very interested in the missing toxicology reports. Once the FBI sees these financial transfers, well, it won't be long before the whole truth is out. Michael's mask cracked then. His eyes darted to the door, to Jessica, back to me. Mom, he said, almost pleading. You don't understand. No. I cut him off, my voice like ice. I understand perfectly. You chose money over blood, greed over family, betrayal over love. And you thought I was too old, too weak, too blind to see it. Jessica hissed, stepping closer. We did what we had to. You don't deserve all of this, living in this house, sitting on that money, while we scrape by. I stood taller, the years of grief and fear burning away in a single moment of fire. Deserve? Daniel built this with his blood, his sweat, his loyalty. And you, both of you, spat on his grave. Michael's face twisted, his calm breaking into rage. He slammed his hand on the table, making the photos scatter. If you go public with this, you'll ruin everything. Don't you see? The family name, Emily's future. At the mention of Emily, something inside me snapped. I leaned forward, staring him down with a fury that even Jessica flinched from. Don't you dare say her name. You would have destroyed her too. Just like you destroyed your father. The room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then came the flashing red and blue lights. Susan had called them hours earlier, her instinct sharper than mine in the haze of betrayal. The sheriff's car pulled into the driveway, 2 deputies stepping out with steady strides. Jessica gasped. Michael froze. I turned to him, my voice soft now, almost tender. You thought you'd bury me, but it's you who's finished. The deputies entered, their questions sharp, their eyes flicking to the evidence scattered on the table. Michael stammered. Jessica tried to charm her way out, but it was too late. As they were let out, handcuffs glinting in the light, Michael looked back at me, his eyes wide, almost childlike. For a moment, I saw the little boy he had once been, the boy who used to run to me after school, pockets full of stones and dreams. But that boy was gone. I closed the door after them, the night air cool on my face. The silence in the house felt different now, not heavy, not suffocating. Free. Susan hugged me tightly. Carol wiped her tears, half grief, half relief. Mark packed up the files, his nod firm, respectful. For the first time in years, I felt Daniel's presence not as a wound, but as a strength inside me. Rest now, love, I whispered, looking at his photo on the mantel. I've finished what you couldn't. And as I sat down, weary but unbroken, I realized something important. Betrayal cuts deep, but kindness and truth cut deeper. I had lost a husband, nearly lost a granddaughter, but I had not lost myself. And that, in the end, was the greatest revenge of all.